In the rugged wilderness of Wyoming, where winters are harsh and communities are tight-knit by necessity, there are places where cruelty can masquerade as humor, and where society's most vulnerable members become the targets of those who mistake meanness for entertainment. For some people, physical differences become sources of shame that others exploit, while for others, isolation becomes both a shield against judgment and a barrier to genuine human connection. This is the story of Jacob "Jake" Morrison, a reclusive rancher who had built his life around solitude and hard work after years of being mocked for his appearance, and 22-year-old Lily Chen, a young woman with dwarfism whose family's financial desperation had made her vulnerable to the cruelest kind of exploitation. When a group of callous men decided to play what they considered a hilarious practical joke by giving Lily to Jake as if she were property, neither could have predicted how their forced encounter would evolve into something that would challenge an entire community's understanding of worth, beauty, and what it truly means to see another person's value. Sometimes love grows not from perfect circumstances, but from the determination of two wounded souls to build something beautiful together, despite a world that has told them they don't deserve happiness. Before we dive into this extraordinary story of unexpected love and transformed lives, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers around the world. Jacob Morrison had been living alone on his remote Wyoming ranch for 8 years, ever since his father's death had left him the sole inheritor of 15,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land in the American West. At 35, Jake possessed the kind of rugged self-sufficiency that came from years of working the land in isolation, but he also carried the deep emotional scars that had driven him to seek solitude in the first place. Jake's face bore the evidence of a childhood accident that had left him with severe burns covering the left side of his face and neck, scars that had made him the target of cruel jokes and stares throughout his youth. The cruelty of classmates, the pity of adults, and the general discomfort of people who didn't know how to look at him without staring had eventually convinced Jake that isolation was preferable to the constant reminder that he didn't fit society's definition of normal. On this particular November morning, Jake was repairing fence line when he heard the sound of vehicles approaching his ranch house. This was unusual, since his property was accessible only by a rough dirt road that discouraged casual visitors. His nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, and the town of Millfield was a 40-minute drive over mountain roads. Curious and concerned about who might be visiting his isolated property, Jake rode his horse back toward the house and discovered 3 pickup trucks parked in his yard. 6 men stood around the vehicles, laughing loudly and drinking beer despite the early hour. Jake recognized them as locals from Millfield, men he knew by sight but had deliberately avoided for years because of their reputation for cruel humor. Well, if it isn't the hermit himself, called out Randy Walsh, a man in his 40s who owned a small garage in town. Jake Morrison, we've got a special delivery for you today. Jake dismounted but remained at a safe distance from the group, his instincts warning him that whatever these men had planned was not going to be pleasant. I didn't order anything, Walsh. Oh no, we've got exactly the right address, laughed Steve Patterson, whose family owned the local hardware store. See, we were down at Murphy's Bar last night talking about how lonely you must get up here, and we decided to solve your problem. The group erupted in laughter that had an edge of cruelty that made Jake's stomach clench with familiar dread. He had heard that particular kind of laughter many times during his school years. What are you talking about? Jake asked. We brought you a woman, Randy announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. Someone to keep you company during those long winter nights. Now, she's not exactly conventional, but then again, neither are you, so we figured you two would be perfect for each other. The men moved aside to reveal someone sitting in the back of one of the pickup trucks, a young Asian woman who appeared to be in her early 20s. Even from a distance, Jake could see that she was a little person, probably no more than 4 feet tall, and that she was clearly distressed. Meet Lily Chen, Steve said with mock formality. Her family owes my uncle about $5,000 for some business deal that went bad, and they can't pay. So we worked out an arrangement. Lily here works off the debt by keeping you company for a while. The group dissolved into laughter again, clearly delighted with what they considered a brilliant practical joke. Jake felt rage building in his chest as he began to understand the full scope of what these men had done. "You can't be serious," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "You can't just deliver a human being to someone like she's a package." "Why not?" Randy replied. "Her family was desperate to settle the debt, and we figured two freaks like you and her deserve each other." Jake looked at the young woman in the truck, noting the humiliation and terror in her eyes. She was beautiful in a delicate way, but it was clear that she understood exactly what was happening and was powerless to prevent it. "Lily," Jake called out, speaking directly to her for the first time. "Do you want to be here? Did you agree to this arrangement?" The woman looked up at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone to ask for her opinion. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, carrying a slight accent. "I had no choice," she said simply. "My family owes money they cannot pay, and these men said I must come here to work off the debt. They said if I refused, they would have my father arrested." Jake felt his hands clench into fists as the full cruelty of the situation became clear. These men had essentially kidnapped a vulnerable young woman and brought her to his ranch as part of some twisted practical joke. "Walsh," Jake said, "get off my property, now." "Now hold on there, Jake," Randy said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "We went to a lot of trouble to arrange this little surprise for you. The least I could do is call the sheriff and report you for kidnapping and human trafficking," Jake replied, "which is exactly what this is, regardless of what story you've told yourselves." "You wouldn't do that," Steve said, but Jake could hear uncertainty in his voice. "You've terrorized a young woman, essentially sold her to a stranger against her will, and transported her across county lines under false pretenses. That's multiple felonies, not a practical joke." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, apparently beginning to realize that their harmless prank might have serious legal consequences. "Look, Morrison," Randy said, his earlier bravado fading, "maybe we got a little carried away, but the debt is real and her family really can't pay." "By treating a human being like property?" Jake asked. "Now you have exactly 2 minutes to get in your trucks and leave my property before I call the sheriff." The men reluctantly began moving toward their vehicles, their earlier jocularity replaced by sullen resentment. "What about the girl?" Randy asked. "That's between her family and whoever they legitimately owe money to," Jake said. "But it's not going to be resolved by treating her like a commodity." As the trucks disappeared down his driveway, Jake found himself alone with Lily, who was still sitting in the back of the pickup truck that had been abandoned in his yard. She looked small and lost and terrified. "Lily," he said gently, approaching the truck slowly, "you're safe now. Those men are gone, and no one is going to force you to do anything you don't want to do." "But my family's debt," she began. "Is not your responsibility to pay with your freedom," Jake said firmly. "You're a person, not property, and no legitimate debt can be settled by forcing someone into servitude." Lily looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been hope. "You're not going to... You don't expect me to... I don't expect anything from you except to be treated with the same respect I'd want for myself," Jake said. "But I do think we need to figure out how to get you home safely and how to deal with whatever situation led to you being vulnerable to these men." For the first time since the trucks had arrived, Lily smiled, a small, tentative expression that transformed her face and made Jake realize that beneath the fear and humiliation was a person of intelligence and strength. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I was so afraid that you would be like them." "I know what it's like to be treated as less than human because of physical differences," Jake said. "I would never do that to someone else." As they stood in his ranch yard, two people who had been wounded by a world that valued appearance over character, Jake and Lily began the first conversation of what would become an extraordinary partnership. Neither could have predicted that the cruelest joke ever played on them would become the foundation for something beautiful, meaningful, and transformative. Unexpected understanding. The first week of Lily's presence at Jake's ranch was marked by careful politeness and mutual uncertainty as both of them navigated the complexities of their unusual situation. Jake had immediately offered Lily the guest bedroom in his house, ensuring she had privacy and security while they figured out how to resolve the circumstances that had brought her to his remote property. Lily threw herself into helping with ranch work with the determination of someone trying to prove their worth after being treated like a burden. Despite her small stature, she demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in adapting to tasks that had been designed for people twice her size, using her intelligence and creativity to find ways to contribute meaningfully to the ranch operation. "Jake," Lily said one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Jake replied, though he tensed slightly, knowing that personal questions often led to discussions about his scars. "Those men who brought me here seem to think you would be grateful for any female companionship, regardless of how it was obtained. They talked about you like you were desperate and pathetic, but you're not like that at all. You're kind, intelligent, and you treat me with more respect than anyone has shown me in months. Why do they see you so differently than you actually are?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer a question that went to the heart of why he had chosen isolation over community. "When I was 12 years old," he said finally, "there was a fire at our house. I had to break a window to get my mother and me out. I got her to safety, but I went back to try to save our dog, and that's when part of the roof collapsed." Lily listened intently, recognizing the kind of story that explained everything about a person's relationship with the world. "The burns covered about 30% of my body, mostly my face and neck and left arm. The physical healing took months, but the social healing never really happened. Kids at school couldn't look at me without staring. Adults either pitied me or were uncomfortable around me, and I gradually realized that my appearance was going to define how people saw me for the rest of my life. So you decided to live alone rather than deal with their reactions. I decided that isolation was better than constantly being reminded that I don't fit other people's definitions of normal or acceptable," Jake said. "Out here, I can be judged by my work, my character, and my treatment of the land and animals." Lily nodded, understanding more than Jake might have expected. "I know something about that. People have been staring at me and making judgments about my capabilities my entire life. The difference is that I haven't had the option of isolation. My family needed me to work and contribute financially. Is that how you ended up in debt to those men?" Lily's expression grew troubled as she considered how to explain the circumstances that had made her vulnerable to such exploitation. "My family owns a small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. We've been struggling for years to compete with larger establishments. When the pandemic hit, we nearly lost everything. A man named David Patterson, the uncle of one of the men who brought me here, offered to lend us money to keep the restaurant open. Let me guess," Jake said. "The terms weren't exactly favorable. The interest rates were extremely high, and there were penalties for late payments that made it almost impossible to pay down the principal. When we fell behind, Patterson started suggesting alternative ways to settle the debt. At first, it was just working extra hours at his other businesses without pay. But then he started talking about how a young woman like me could be useful to men who didn't have many social options." Jake felt anger building in his chest as he began to understand how Lily had been systematically exploited and manipulated. "That's when he arranged for his nephews to bring you here as part of their joke," Jake said. "He told my parents that you were a lonely rancher who had specifically requested a live-in housekeeper, and that working for you would allow me to pay off the family debt while learning valuable skills. My parents believed him because they were desperate." "Lily," Jake said gently, "you were never the reason your family was in financial trouble, and you shouldn't have been expected to sacrifice your freedom to solve problems that weren't your fault." Over the following days, Their conversations revealed more about both their backgrounds and their dreams. Lily shared her love of cooking and her hope of someday opening her own restaurant. Jake talked about his plans for expanding his ranch's conservation efforts and his interest in developing sustainable agricultural practices. But perhaps most importantly, they began to develop a friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than character. "Jake," Lily said one morning as they worked together to repair a fence, "I want you to know that these past 2 weeks have been the first time in my adult life that someone has treated me as a complete person rather than as a problem to be solved or a curiosity to be stared at." "You've given me something I didn't realize I was missing," Jake replied. "You've reminded me that isolation isn't the same as peace, and that there are people in the world who can see past physical appearances to appreciate someone's character and capabilities. But what happens when we figure out how to resolve my family's debt situation? What happens to this?" Lily gestured between them, acknowledging the connection that had developed. Jake looked at the young woman who had brought warmth, intelligence, and purpose back into his life. "I hope," he said carefully, "that by then we'll have built something valuable enough that neither of us will want to give it up. But that decision has to be yours to make freely, without pressure from debt or family obligations." Lily smiled, and Jake felt his heart respond in ways he hadn't experienced since before the accident. "I hope so too," she said quietly. As they continued their work together, both Jake and Lily realized that the cruel joke that had brought them together was transforming into something genuine and meaningful. They were building a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and growing affection that had nothing to do with the circumstances that had initially forced their encounter. Fighting for what matters. 3 months after Lily's arrival at the ranch, the partnership that had begun as an emergency situation had evolved into something that both Jake and Lily had come to treasure. But their growing happiness was threatened by external pressures that tested their resolve and their commitment to building a life together. The crisis came to a head on a cold February morning when Jake and Lily were working together in the barn when they heard vehicles approaching the ranch house. Through the barn windows, they could see the same 3 pickup trucks that had brought Lily to the ranch months earlier. "They're back," Lily said quietly, fear creeping into her voice. "They've come to take me away." "No one is taking you anywhere," Jake said firmly. "You're here by choice now, and no one has the right to force you to leave." Randy Walsh and his companions climbed out of their trucks with the swagger of men who believed they held all the cards. But there was something different about their demeanor this time, a harder edge that suggested they were no longer viewing this situation as entertainment. "Well, well," Randy called out as Jake and Lily emerged from the barn. "Look what we have here, the freak and his little China doll, playing house like they're a real couple." "What do you want, Walsh?" Jake asked, positioning himself protectively between Randy and Lily. "We want what belongs to us," Steve Patterson replied, his voice carrying an undertone of threat. "Lily here still owes her family's debt, and that debt is owed to my uncle. We've been patient, but now it's time for her to get back to work." "Lily doesn't owe you anything," Jake said. "Whatever arrangement your uncle made with her family was predatory and probably illegal." "That's where you're wrong, Morrison," Randy said, pulling out a folded document. "We've got a signed contract right here that says otherwise. Lily's father agreed that she would work for the Patterson family until the debt is paid in full with interest. That comes to about $8,000 now." Jake felt his stomach clench as he realized that Lily's family had apparently signed legal documents that gave these men some kind of claim over her labor. "Let me see that contract," Jake said. "I don't think so," Randy replied. "But I'll tell you what, we're reasonable men. If you can pay the $8,000 right now, we'll consider the debt settled, and you can keep your little girlfriend." "She's not for sale," Jake said, his voice dangerous, "and she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." "Actually," Steve said with a cruel smile, "she doesn't really have a choice. See, if she doesn't come with us voluntarily, we'll have to involve the police. And when they see this contract and hear about how she's been living here with you, unmarried, for months, well, that might raise some questions. Jake understood the threat immediately. The suggestion that he and Lily were living together inappropriately could damage both their reputations and potentially give authorities reason to view their situation with suspicion. Lily stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite the obvious fear. "Mr. Walsh, Mr. Patterson, I want you to know that Jake has never treated me with anything but respect and kindness. He has protected me, supported me, and given me more dignity and freedom than I've ever experienced. If you try to force me to leave, you'll be taking me away from the best situation I've ever had." "That's touching," Steve said mockingly, "but it doesn't change the legal reality." "Actually," said a new voice from behind the group, "I think you'll find that contract is worth about as much as the paper it's written on." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Patricia Collins approaching from her patrol car, which had apparently arrived while they were focused on their confrontation. Jake felt a surge of relief, having called the sheriff's office earlier that morning. "Sheriff Collins," Randy said, his confidence beginning to waver, "this is just a civil matter. A debt that involves holding a young woman in what amounts to indentured servitude?" Sheriff Collins asked. "I've been looking into this case since Mr. Morrison contacted me, and I've got some interesting information to share." The sheriff pulled out her own folder of documents and addressed the group with authority. "First, the contract you're waving around was signed under duress by people who didn't fully understand its terms. That makes it unenforceable. Second, transporting someone across state lines under false pretenses for forced labor is human trafficking, which is a federal crime. And third, your uncle's lending practices appear to violate several state and federal laws regarding predatory lending." Randy and Steve exchanged nervous glances, apparently beginning to realize that their situation had serious legal consequences. "Now," Sheriff Collins continued, "you gentlemen have exactly two choices. You can get in your trucks and drive away, and we'll forget this incident ever happened. Or you can continue to harass Mr. Morrison and Miss Chen, in which case I'll be placing you under arrest and calling the FBI." "This isn't over," Randy said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Collins replied firmly. "And if any of you come back to this ranch or contact Miss Chen in any way, you'll be arrested for harassment." As the men reluctantly returned to their trucks and drove away, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. But more than relief, he felt gratitude toward Lily for standing up to the men who had tried to claim ownership of her life. After the sheriff left, Jake and Lily found themselves alone together, processing what had just happened and what it meant for their future. "Jake," Lily said, "I need you to know that when I defended our life here, I meant every word. These months with you have shown me what it feels like to be valued for who I am, rather than what I can do for other people." "Lily," Jake replied, "you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever when that accident changed my face. You've given me back the ability to connect with another person without fear or shame." As they stood together in the ranch yard, where their relationship had begun with such cruelty, Jake and Lily realized that they had not only survived the attempt to tear them apart, but had emerged stronger and more committed to building something lasting together. A crown of true love. 1 year after the cruel joke that had brought Lily to Jake's ranch, their relationship had transformed from emergency arrangement to genuine partnership to something that both of them finally felt ready to call love. The seasonal rhythms of ranch life had become the backdrop for a deep emotional connection that had surprised them both with its intensity and naturalness. On this particular morning in early November, exactly 1 year after Lily's arrival, Jake stood in his kitchen, preparing breakfast, while Lily worked at the table, reviewing business plans for the restaurant she hoped to open in nearby Millfield. Over the past months, she'd been developing a concept for a small cafe that would serve both traditional Chinese cuisine and American comfort food. "Jake," Lily said, looking up from her laptop, "I got the loan approval letter yesterday. The bank is willing to finance the restaurant project." Jake felt a complex mixture of pride in Lily's achievement and anxiety about what her business success might mean for their relationship. "That's wonderful news," he said, and meant it despite his concerns. "But there's something else," Lily continued carefully. "The bank wants me to relocate to Millfield to be closer to the restaurant location." Jake set down his coffee cup, processing the implications. After a year of building their life together on the ranch, the prospect of separation felt almost unbearable. "That makes sense from a business perspective," he said, though his voice betrayed more emotion than he intended. "About 45 minutes by car, depending on weather. Close enough to commute, but far enough that it would be impractical during winter storms or when the restaurant requires long hours." Jake nodded, recognizing that they were facing the first major test of their relationship, whether it was strong enough to survive the practical challenges of pursuing individual goals. "Lily," he said, sitting down across from her, "I want you to know that your success and happiness are more important to me than my comfort or convenience. If opening this restaurant is what you need to do to build the life you want, then I'll support that decision completely." Lily reached across the table and took his hand, her touch still capable of sending warmth through his entire body. "Jake, this past year with you has shown me what it feels like to be truly seen and valued by another person. You've supported my dreams, respected my independence, and loved me not in spite of my differences, but as a complete person. I don't want to give that up to pursue a business opportunity." "But you also don't want to give up your dreams to maintain a relationship," Jake said, understanding her dilemma. "And you shouldn't have to choose." "What if I didn't have to choose?" Lily asked, her eyes brightening with an idea. "What if there was a way to have both the restaurant and our life together? What do you have in mind?" "What if we got married?" Lily said, the words coming out in a rush. "What if we made our partnership official and legal, and then figured out how to manage both the ranch and the restaurant as a family business?" Jake felt his heart stop and then restart with a rhythm that seemed to shake his entire body. "Lily, are you proposing to me?" "I think I am," she said, her cheeks flushing. "I know it's not traditional for the woman to propose, and I know we haven't talked about marriage before, but I also know that I love you, and I want to build a life with you that honors both our individual dreams and our shared goals." Jake stood up from his chair and walked around the table to kneel beside Lily, taking both her hands in his and looking directly into her eyes. "Lily Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, some cruel men brought you to my ranch as a joke, thinking they were dumping an unwanted burden on someone they considered equally worthless. But they were wrong about both of us. You're not a burden, you're a gift, and I'm not worthless. I'm a man who's learned to appreciate true beauty when he sees it." "Is that a yes?" Lily asked, tears streaming down her face. "That's a yes to everything," Jake replied. "Yes to marriage, yes to supporting your restaurant dreams, yes to building whatever kind of life allows us to be together while pursuing the work that matters to us." 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, with the Wyoming mountains serving as a backdrop, Jake and Lily were married in a small ceremony held in the pasture where they had first learned to work together as partners. The guest list was small but meaningful. Sheriff Collins, who had become a friend and advocate, Dr. Sarah Kim, the veterinarian who had helped Jake expand his ranch's conservation efforts, and several local business owners who had come to respect both Jake's agricultural expertise and Lily's entrepreneurial vision. But perhaps most significantly, Lily's parents had traveled from San Francisco to attend the wedding, having finally understood that their daughter had found not just safety, but genuine love. As the celebration continued into the evening, Jake and Lily found themselves walking together through the ranch where their relationship had taken root, reflecting on the journey that had brought them from that cruel joke to this moment of commitment and joy. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if those men hadn't brought me here?" Lily asked. "I try not to think about that," Jake replied, "because it makes me realize how close I came to missing the best thing that ever happened to me. I used to think I was cursed by my appearance, by the way people stared and made assumptions about my capabilities," Lily said. But now I understand that the right person doesn't see your differences as limitations. They see them as part of what makes you uniquely beautiful. And I used to think that my scars made me unworthy of love, Jake replied. But you've shown me that love isn't about perfect appearances. It's about seeing and accepting someone completely, including their wounds and their healing. As they stood together under the star-filled Wyoming sky, Jake and Lily reflected on how completely their understanding of love and worth had been transformed by their unlikely partnership. What had begun as the cruelest joke either of them had ever experienced had become the foundation for the most genuine love story their community had ever witnessed. They had proven that beauty wasn't about conforming to society's standards, but about finding someone who could see past surface appearances to appreciate the strength, intelligence, and character beneath. They had shown that love could indeed grow from the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the people society considers least valuable are the ones who have the most to teach about courage, resilience, and the transformative power of genuine acceptance. The cruel joke had become a love story, and the solitary rancher had indeed crowned his queen, not with material riches, but with the kind of love that recognized her true worth and celebrated her exactly as she was. This extraordinary story of Jake and Lily reminds us that true love sees beyond physical appearances to embrace the whole person, and that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst misfortunes. Their journey shows us that real beauty lies in character, compassion, and the courage to build something meaningful together, despite a world that tells us we don't deserve happiness. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories about love, acceptance, and second chances. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from, and share how someone has seen past your differences to appreciate your true worth. Remember, we all have the power to choose love over judgment and to see the extraordinary value in people that society might overlook. Until next time, keep believing in the transformative power of unconditional love.